All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for what I think will be a very exciting talk, wrongful convictions in the United States. My name is Amanda James, and I work in the Alumni Relations Office. I also have the privilege of working with our Criminal Justice Alumni Council and working closely with Dr. Keeling from the Department of Criminal Justice on that. Can I increase my volume? I don't think I have a way to increase mine other than just talking louder, but I can always talk very loud. So Sarah, hopefully I sound okay. If not, send another message and let us know. But we have a wonderful criminal justice group of alumni. Dr. Keeling sort of oversees the initiatives that they do as far as guest speakers and different events. She is actually traveling right now, so she sends her greetings, I'm sure. But she asked me if I could be here tonight to introduce our speaker. And I think if you signed up, you're probably as excited as I am about this event. So I think I just sort of want to jump into it and say I'm excited to have Dr. Virginia Braden here. She is a licensed private investigator specializing in violent crimes and wrongful convictions, as well as a criminologist, behavioral analyst, criminal profiler, and a certified hostage negotiator. She holds her doctorate in criminal justice from the University of Louisville, and as she mentioned to me earlier, is a three-time University of Louisville graduate. She has worked in the criminal justice field as a victim's advocate, private investigator, and behavioral analyst, criminal profiler, investigative consultant, and trainer educator for more than 20 years, serving private clients, various innocence projects, as well as law enforcement agencies, both in the US and abroad. And I will say, we have a pretty jam-packed presentation. So we are gonna save any questions for the end. I'm gonna keep an eye on those in the chat though. So feel free to send them throughout the presentation, but we probably will hold most of the questions until the end if you have any. But without further ado, I am excited to hand it over to Dr. Virginia Braden.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here this evening with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. All right. Does everybody see that?
Perfect.
Awesome. I'm really excited to be here to have the opportunity to talk with you all about wrongful convictions in the United States. This is a really important topic and an incredibly relevant one for today's world. As Amanda already mentioned, I'm a licensed investigator and I've worked in the field of violent crimes investigations for over 20 years. And for about the last decade, that has included a significant amount of wrongful conviction cases. So I've had the opportunity to get to know the faces and the voices of the wrongfully convicted, both while they were still behind bars, striving to prove their innocence, and then after the fact, once they have won their exoneration. And that particular factor married with the study, my study, empirical study and scholarly study of wrongful convictions has really been a true gift. It has resulted in a deep passion for this subject, and more than knowing the mere numbers, I know the voices and the stories. It's been a powerfully motivating factor in my life. So I'm excited tonight to share some of that with you. So right off the bat, let's look at terminology so we're all on the same page. A wrongful conviction is the conviction of a factually innocent person. An exoneration occurs when an individual who has been convicted of the crime is later found to be innocent of that crime and relieved of all legal consequences of that conviction by an authority with the power to do so. And this is based on new evidence, and you can underscore that word new, it matters. We're going to come back around to that later. New evidence of his or her innocence. So an exoneree is someone who has been exonerated. So the advent of DNA and other forensic capabilities really pushed the issue of wrongful convictions and allowed us to see very concretely with full proof, 100% proof, that people were being wrongfully convicted. And along with that advent came the efforts to collect data on wrongful convictions. And there are two organizations that have primarily been responsible for that, or that have taken that on. The first is the most comprehensive. It's the National Registry of Exonerations, and they collect data on all exonerations. They have a wonderful website full of visual aids. You can look things up by the factors that contributed to it. You can read the stories, and they are a phenomenal resource for understanding this issue better. The second organization that has worked to collect data is the Innocence Project, and there are about 53 Innocence Projects in the country. They are nonprofits that provide legal services to the wrongfully convicted, and their efforts are directed at proving the innocence of wrongfully convicted persons and winning an exoneration for them. Now, the Innocence Project collected data only on DNA exonerations, and they actually have stopped compiling stats around in 2020. They stopped. So, but we still have some valuable information from what they have provided for us. And as I mentioned, there's the advent of DNA and forensic capabilities really did push this issue. There's been a rapid increase in recent decades due to forensic capabilities, but we've known about wrongful convictions for a really long time. As a matter of fact, in 1932, there was a book called Convicting the Innocent, Errors of Criminal Justice. And this book detailed 65 cases of wrongful convictions. So all the way back to 1932. And if you read that book and you look at the things they identified as being factors on what went wrong, you will see that it very closely mirrors what we know now today with our modern technology. Another thing that DNA evidence has done with its concrete proof that people have been wrongfully convicted is it also pushed an awareness out into the general public. So, there's no way to ignore that a person was not supposed to be behind bars, that they were wrongfully convicted when there's DNA evidence proving it. And that has resulted in media outlets of all kinds. So Netflix, TV shows, TV series, box office movies, picking up these stories. And it has been, I believe, a really positive thing as the stories and the voices and the inside out details, the close direct look at what went wrong in these cases has been made available to the general public. And one scholar in the field refers to this as an innocence consciousness. So that really has been something that has been developing and growing stronger over the years since DNA. And years ago, when I would tell people that I work wrongful conviction cases, they would look at me like I have 7 heads. Like there was some really odd reactions to that. And now when I tell people that, they say, oh, like the Netflix thing. So it's been, I think a very, very positive thing as everyday men and women get to know and understand these stories and the things that go wrong. So currently, and this is actually current as of mid-August, there are 3,217 known exonerations. And I have known in red because we are not in any way sure that we have captured all of the exonerations. The National Registry of Exonerations has begun collecting, they have data from about 1989 forward. There is no government agency that is responsible for collecting the data. There is nothing, no organization that's responsible for it that's mandated by law or by state statute. So it's been up to private individuals and organizations to collect this. And the NRE began collecting that from 1989 forward. And they relied on the general public to come forward with the cases so they could research them and see if they fit the criteria. They dug into newspaper stories, dug into court cases. And so known is a very, very important thing. There's also another element here that the only way we can study wrongful convictions is to study the exonerations. So we know there are still people behind bars who were wrongfully convicted, but they have not yet won their exoneration. So the only way that we have to be able to study wrongful convictions is the ones that have been successful in proving that they are innocent. Tragically, there have been more than 27,200 years lost wrongfully. This is a time that people have spent behind bars for crimes they did not commit. It's an incredibly sobering thought to think of. When we look at the demographics that are present by the data that has been collected, we can see that overwhelmingly those persons who were wrongfully convicted and wanted exoneration were male, over 90%, and less than 9% female. Now we do have racial breakdown, and racial disproportionality is consistently an issue that arises in criminal justice data all throughout the criminal justice system at all different points in time, and is clearly an issue here as well. We can see that 53% of all exonerees were Black, 33% white, 12% Hispanic, and all others fell into the category of 2% were into the category of all others. The reason this is an issue, African Americans comprise about 13% of the US population. They comprise 33% of the prison population. So to see that they are 53% of all exonerations, and in fact, they represent 60% of all lost years served wrongfully, this is clearly a problem. And in some categories of crimes, such as homicides and sexual assaults and rape, the disparity is actually far greater. Now we look at the age range of those persons who have been wrongfully convicted, and the ages of 17 to 26 is the age group with the highest percentage of persons wrongfully convicted. Age 20 has the most. And this is a really sobering thought stat. It stopped me in my tracks. 136 exonerated individuals were between the ages of 11 and 16. Now, because we do have these collections of data, it has made it possible for us to be able to study contributing factors. And this is where there's a lot of hope, right? Because if we're seeing and identifying the things that keep showing up in the wrongful convictions, then we can begin to pull those apart and see what can we do differently, what could we reinvent, what could we revise, what could we eliminate, what could we add that could contribute to lessening the chances that someone is going to be wrongfully convicted. First, I want to point out that most cases actually contain multiple contributing factors, which is just mind-blowing. So it's not just that one thing has gone wrong, but that there have been multiple things, multiple points at which the system, which should have worked, did not. And that is a very sobering thought. If we look at the percentages, the breakdown here is that perjury or false accusations occurs in 62% of all cases. Official misconduct occurs 57% of the time. And official misconduct is defined as wrongdoing by an officer or a detective or a prosecutor or a forensic scientist or a child social worker or a child caseworker. So that's the category is defined by wrongdoing by those particular individuals that have impacted the case. Eyewitness misidentification happens in 26% of all exonerations, but if we look at the DNA exonerations, it's actually quite a bit more. We have it in over 70% of the cases. So that's sort of a really mind-blowing thought that 70% of DNA exonerations, there was a person who wrongly identified, who misidentified the perpetrator, and that person was later found innocent by DNA. False and misleading forensic evidence occurs in 23% of all cases. And this visual graph, by the way, is from the National Registry of Exonerations. Again, they have a lot of really great visual aids and all sorts of ways that they showcase the data they've collected. False confessions happen in 12% of wrongful convictions. And that's really hard for us to wrap our minds around. It's really, really hard to think that someone would falsely confess to something they did not do, but it does indeed happen. And there are certain segments of the population that are more prone to falsely confessing. We'll talk about that a little later on. There are two other contributing factors, inadequate legal defense and use of informants. The informants are, you might know the term jailhouse snitches. So these are people who were incentivized to give the information they gave, incentivized through deals on their own criminal sentencing or financial compensation, or sometimes a combination of both. So these are the 7 factors that repeatedly show up that have been identified as contributing to someone being wrongfully convicted and incarcerated for something that they did not do. And I think this is an important thing to look at, that we have this information. This should point us forward. This should point us to solutions. It should point us to areas to really dig into, you know, and I can't help but think if there were an airplane engine, let's say, that were to fail at random times, rather consistently, sometimes resulting in emergency landings, or sometimes resulting in plane crashes and loss of life, you know, whether it was be just distressing or people actually dying, there would be public outcry. People would not stand for those planes to take to the air. There would be demands that that situation be remedied, that the engines be replaced or repaired or removed. And, you know, I would hope for that to be something that begins to really take on purpose and meaning here in wrongful convictions as we look at these things that we know, hey, there are these issues that consistently contribute to someone losing their liberty and being ripped out of their community and away from their family. It's something that gives us, like I said, truly a way forward, something that we can do, provides hope. Okay, we are looking now at the types of crimes that most exonerations occur in. So this would be what the person was wrongfully convicted of. 36.5% of the time someone is exonerated, they were charged and wrongfully convicted for murder. And the process for exoneration takes a very, very long time. It's a long, drawn out process. And so what we're seeing, and what you have to keep in mind as we're looking at this data, is that if you're convicted of something that is a lesser crime with a lesser sentence, you are likely to serve that time out before you ever make any real headway in being able to win an exoneration. So we tend to see the higher amounts of exonerations happen in categories where they were given long sentences. As a matter of fact, the Innocence Project usually does not take cases on unless they've exhausted all appeals. So they're like the last hope for that particular defendant. So that's important to keep in mind as we're looking here. 17.4% were for drug possession, 11% for sexual assault, and 10% for child sex abuse. And again, these facts are current as of mid-August. 9 years is the average time served for DNA cases, for non-DNA cases, and for DNA cases, the average is 16 years. And I can't help when I think of 9 years to think of where I was and what I was doing 9 years ago and all the things that have passed in between. And I think of my children and how much they've grown and where they are in life now compared to where they were 9 years ago. And to think that that is the average time that someone's going to spend in prison for a non-DNA case is very sobering. The types of sentences that were given out for the exonerations that we know of: 471 individuals were sentenced to life, 228 to life without parole, and 135 individuals were sentenced to death. 135 persons who were exonerated and proven innocent had actually been given a death sentence. We're going to look now at the types of crime that broken down by race and ethnicity. And we've already pointed to the racial disproportionality impact that we've seen in the data for wrongful convictions and exonerations. And you can see here that with the exception of child sex abuse, that African Americans are more often wrongfully convicted of all other types of crimes. And again, this is clearly an issue. And it's a tragedy when anyone is wrongfully convicted, but there is an issue here where we're seeing that it has a greater impact on the African American community. And here's a heat map for you to show the areas where wrongful convictions are happening the most often and the least often. We have in first place Cook County, Illinois, with 444 wrongful convictions. We have Harris County, Texas, with 190 wrongful convictions, and Kings County, New York, rounds out the top three with 85 wrongful convictions. Now, I mentioned a little bit ago a stat on persons who have been proven innocent, who have been sentenced to death. And that was from the NRE data, which again has been collected primarily since on incidences from 1989 moving forward to current day. But the Death Penalty Information Center has actually been tracking this data since 1973. And so their number is a little different than the NRE, and their data shows that since 1973, there have been 190 death row inmates who have been exonerated of all charges and set free. And that breaks down into that particular population of death row inmates who were exonerated. 103 were African-American, 67 were white, 17 were Hispanic, and 3 fell into the category of other. We're going to take a minute and just look at the slice of DNA exonerations. The Innocence Project, again, has been collecting data on this and stopped in 2020. But what we have here is still a valuable set of information. 560 exonerations overall. Average time served was 16 years, 5,200 plus years served wrongfully, 34 served time on death row, 198 were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. 134 of the DNA exonerations had a person who falsely confessed to the crime that they did not commit, and 61 pled guilty. And again, those are things that are super hard to wrap our minds around. We sort of just, we really have a hard time understanding that, but it does in fact happen, and it's important that we look at that. The first DNA exoneration occurred on August 14th, 1989, and shockingly, no crime had actually occurred. The person who had been wrongfully convicted was a gentleman named Gary Dotson. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping and rape. He was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and rape, and he was given a sentence of 25 to 50 years. The incident was reported in 1977. He was convicted in 1979, and he served 10 years. 10 years behind bars. He was exonerated in 1989 by DNA. So the situation was that there was a woman who had had sex with her boyfriend and was concerned that she might be pregnant, would face consequences and repercussions from her parents. So she filed a report with the police of being kidnapped and raped. And she gave a description of the person who did this. And that description, the police found Gary Dotson. He matched that particular description, and he was put on trial and he was convicted. There were other problems with his case as well. There was flawed serology, and there was hair analysis, which has pretty much been debunked as junk science now. So these were elements that were present in his particular case. And thankfully for him, the advent of DNA made it possible for him to show that he was not responsible for the crime. And in fact, there had actually been no crime. Now, DNA has also done something else for us in terms of bringing persons to justice and showing that someone is innocent of a crime. DNA has also been responsible for identifying the correct perpetrator. So this has been a really interesting thing. 165 times DNA has not only cleared someone of being the guilty party, but has identified the person who was guilty. And the Innocence Project went through and they collected some stats on this. They looked at the persons who were the actual perpetrators for the crimes that their clients spent time behind bars for. And they looked at what their criminal activity was during the time they should have been behind bars, and someone else was doing the time for their particular crime. And they found out that these persons could, contributed had many other additional crimes for which they were convicted, which included 36 murders, 83 sexual assaults, and 35 other violent crimes. So that's something else to think about. The repercussions of a wrongful conviction are not just that someone is put behind bars wrongfully and they're deprived of their freedom, but that the real person, the real perpetrator, is then left out on the streets and can and has gone on to commit other very, very serious crimes. I want to mention something else about DNA testing and that. So there's quite often actually in the justice system, we find that there are laws on the books, or there are mandates, or there are policies, there are procedures that are intended to fix a problem or remedy something, but in actuality, things don't really roll out the way that they are intended to. And as an example here, access to DNA testing is on the books in every single state. Everyone is guaranteed a right to DNA testing. But the stats show that it is opposed by prosecutors in 1 out of 5 cases. So this can delay things, this can hold things up, this can really draw things out, it can eliminate options for persons. And I had a case, and just last year, this inmate was able to get the results back from DNA testing that he had requested 11 years prior. So he waited 11 years for DNA testing to come back in his case. And when it came back, the results were that it was too degraded to be of use. And did that 11 years make a difference? No, we don't know. We don't know if it was properly stored to begin with. We don't know that, but for sure, 11 years time passing while you're waiting for, the saving grace, DNA testing is just a horrible thing to endure. Also, latest data from the Innocence Project indicates that they had to close about a third of their cases because of lost or destroyed evidence. And that is a heavy, heavy conversation to have with a wrongfully convicted defendant who's sitting behind bars, and they are hoping and praying that there's going to be something that can be done with the evidence that may have DNA and prove their innocence and win their freedom. And to find out that it's been lost or destroyed is absolutely devastating. So we take a look at the slice of exonerations that are DNA exonerations. And DNA exoneration, I don't think I said this earlier, it's an exoneration where DNA played the top role in the exoneration. So it would not have happened were it not for DNA. There are exonerations that have DNA involved, but it's not the thing that proves the person innocent. Maybe it's degraded or whatever the case may be. We look at this data, we again see a very consistent theme. 61% of DNA exonerees were African-American, 30% Caucasian. You can read on through there, 8% Hispanic. And again, just a consistent theme. Contributing factors or DNA. So these stack up a little differently than the overall exoneration data. 69%, nearly 70% involved eyewitness misidentification. And there are major problems with human recall, human memory, eyewitness identifications. And these are very well researched. This is empirically validated. We know we don't just hit the rewind button and the memory plays forward exactly as it transpired. So that has thankfully led to a lot of efforts on policy changes in the terms of the way that lineups are conducted, which is a very positive thing. That's what these contributing factors should do. They should spark further research, analysis. We should be changing things that we know contribute to them. So this is an important thing. Six packs are a bad thing in terms of lineups. There's all kinds of things. I won't get into that today, but I just want to remark on this, that this really has been something that has led to policy change in a lot of states. 42% of the eyewitness misidentifications were cross-racial. 32% involved multiple misidentifications of the same person. 27% involved misidentification through the use of a composite sketch. 44% of DNA exonerations involved misapplication of forensic science, and that can occur in not just in someone being convicted with science that has now been debunked, but this can also occur and does occur and is an issue when forensic scientists misrepresent the certainty of their results. They misrepresent what their tests can actually do. They don't give full information. They don't tell what the error percentage is or the other possibilities that exist. And this is an important issue to address because as juror members, the general public, when we're on a jury, we're really depending on the people who are experts to be forthcoming, and we're trusting them. It's their day job, right? It's what they do. It's what they are trained to do. And so we put a lot of weight into what they say results mean and what it is that a test can do. 29% of DNA exonerations involved false confessions. And I mentioned earlier that there are segments of the population that are more prone to false confessions, or they are more easily influenced by some of the procedures that police sometimes use that are more likely to result in a false confession. And those two characteristics are actually three. One is being a younger defendant. So you can see here that 49% of the people who falsely confessed were 21 years old or younger, and 33% were 18 years old or younger. And 10% of the false confessors had known mental health or mental capacity issues. So these are the populations that are more susceptible to the tactics that are sometimes used by police or detectives to gain a confession, and they are more likely to result in a false confession for these particular groups of people. 17% involve the use of informants or, as we referred to before, jailhouse snitches. Turning now to time to exoneration. And what I mean by that is that this is how long it took from the time that someone was convicted so they were able to prove that they were innocent. And what the data shows is that the average time lost ranges from 1.3 years for drug crime exonerations to 13.2 years for murder exonerations. However, 182 individuals have spent 25 years or more behind bars as a result of a wrongful conviction. The longest time ever served behind bars wrongfully was Anthony Mazza. He was 25 years old in 1973 when the crime occurred, and he was 72 years of age when he was exonerated and released in 2021 in the state of Massachusetts. The second longest time served by a wrongfully convicted defendant was served by Richard Phillips. He 45 years and 2 months and 9 days behind bars. He was just 25 years old when the crime occurred in 1972, and he was 70 years old when he was finally exonerated and released in 2017 in the state of Michigan. And the third longest, this is actually Isaiah Andrews, who was an Ohio Innocence Project client, who's the project that I do the most work for. He was behind bars. He was wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife. He was spent 45 years, 1 month, and 24 days behind bars. He was 36 at the time of the crime in 1975, and he was 81 years old when he was exonerated in 2020, again, in the state of Ohio. When we look at the breakdown of time to exoneration by race and ethnicity, we see that it is 10.7 years from the time of conviction to time of to the point of exoneration for African Americans, and 7.2 for Hispanic exonerees and 7.2 for white exonerees. Now, I will say that first of all, there is a problem consistently throughout the justice system with collecting data on ethnicity. So that means that our data on Hispanics is sometimes squishy. It's not nearly as solid as what we'd like it to be. It is a known problem. We just don't collect it consistently from point to point, not just from state to state, but within the same jurisdiction. So I want to point that out because I feel like that's an important thing. Some scholars have referred to that as making it sort of like the Hispanic experience is somewhat an unknown or invisible, sort of foggy picture for us using the numbers. In some categories of crime, the disparity in time to exoneration for Black exonerees is even greater. And for Hispanic exonerees, there are some categories of crime, including sexual assault and child sex abuse and drug crimes, in which they do spend more time behind bars before being exonerated than do white exonerees. And the reason this is all concerning, again, a wrongful conviction is a tragedy. No matter who you are, what your background, what your racial, ethnic heritage is, it's a tragedy. But what this means when we're looking at the differences in time to exoneration is that even the remedy to this injustice is being applied in a way that is not equal across race and ethnicity. And that is clearly reason for concern. So how exactly does one get unconvicted? There's a very well-known process, very concrete process for getting convicted, but it turns out that getting exonerated is not nearly as streamlined a process. There is an important study that I want to talk about here at the beginning of this segment. And this particular study looked at 250 DNA exonerations. So 250 cases where the person who had been convicted and sentenced and incarcerated for something they did not do later had DNA prove that they were innocent. It looked at what the outcomes were in the challenges to their convictions using the processes we currently have in place to challenge a conviction. And 90% of them failed. 90%. So that means that 90% of the time, our justice system was unable to look at an innocent, wrongfully convicted defendant and see that they had been wrongfully convicted when they use the means and the ways, the avenues that are available to us today. A sobering thought. All right, so what can you do post-conviction? You can file a direct appeal. However, a direct appeal is only looking at flaws in the process by which a defendant was convicted. They are not second guessing the factual accuracy of the conviction. As a matter of fact, they will not entertain any thoughts or conversations of new evidence or witnesses coming forward or none of that. So some scholars have termed this to be invisible evidence. They will not look at that. They are concerned only with legal errors. And if you pled guilty, and as we saw in the data, people do indeed plead guilty to the things they did not do, it is nearly impossible to get an appeal. Just nearly impossible. There are also some aspects of criminal trials that we know contribute to wrongful convictions, but they're not grounds for appeal because they don't violate the state or federal law. So all of this together has led one scholar to remark that the chances of a reversal on direct appeal bear no relation to the chances that the wrong person has been convicted. Another avenue post-conviction is that you can file a motion for a new trial based on new evidence. And I remarked earlier that word new was important. If this is the route that you decide to take, you're going to face, first of all, you're going to face a time limit, depending on what state you were convicted of, that goes from 1 month to 3 years time from the date you were convicted to present this new evidence. Right now, how in the world are you supposed to find new evidence when you're behind bars? Right, unless you've got a family that's got some resources that can hire an investigator, this is not a likely thing to happen. Studies show, data shows that most new evidence tends to surface only after a significant amount of time has passed and often only after an investigation. Not only must you adhere to these time limits, but you must show the evidence could not have been discovered earlier and that it's likely to result in an acquittal. So there's some bars there. There are some bars. Now, if you can prove a Brady violation is when the defense was not given evidence they should have had during the trial. So it should have been turned over and it wasn't. There's some element that was not provided to them that should have been. That is a Brady violation. If you can prove a Brady violation, these time limits go away, so you no longer have to be concerned with those. However, these other things still apply. You have to show why the evidence could not have been discovered earlier. You have to show that it is likely to change the outcome of the trial. And there was just an Innocence Project case just yesterday that had a motion for new trial that was denied because the judge did not feel that the evidence that had been presented was likely to change the outcome of the case. I disagree, but I'm not the judge. And to look at what this looks like in real time as well, there's an Ohio Innocence Project case where at the time of trial, this particular defendant had multiple eyewitnesses who could state that he was in New York City at the time of the crime, which occurred in Ohio. And there were multiple affidavits, multiple persons, both associated with him and not associated with him, that could verify that he was indeed in New York at the time of these crimes in 1991. But at time of trial, the prosecutor mentioned that he could have flown from New York to Ohio, committed the murders, and then flown back to New York. However, no one presented any evidence of that. No one presented a boarding pass. No one presented sales for an airline ticket. No one presented anything at all for that. And unfortunately, the defense attorney also did not go that route and check that out so that they could refute that. It was just stated that that was possible. So this individual was indeed convicted. And in 2018, I managed to get archived FAA flight data, which showed every flight in and out of JFK into Cleveland, Ohio during the time frame of the murder. And there was absolutely no flights that matched up time-wise. It would have allowed him to be in New York when he was seen and be in Ohio at the time of the murder. But that does not matter because it could have been discovered at time of trial and no one bothered to check. So as you can see, it's great supporting evidence for the other evidence that was there that he was in New York, but it's significant hurdles. And the skepticism, as when you're filing for a motion for a new trial, you are sometimes filing in front of the same judge who presided over the original trial to begin with. So again, 90% of the first 250 DNA exonerations failed in their challenges. Some other issues with post-conviction reviews: you do not have counsel. So if you're indigent, you do not have a counsel appointed to you. This is where the Innocence Project and other professional exonerators come in. There are private attorneys also that will take on post-conviction cases. The Innocence Project is a nonprofit, so their services are provided for free. We've mentioned the filing deadline, the hurdle of the evidence, that it could not have been discovered or presented earlier is a factor. That is a factor when you go in front of the judge to request it. You've got to be able to show that and document that. It is a very, very slow process. Defendants with less serious crimes for which they had lighter sentences may very well be out before they're able to reach this particular stage. There is one other option that's available to you. It is a federal habeas corpus, but you must be able to prove that a federal constitutional violation affected your case. There are some offices now that are housed within some prosecutors' offices around the country, where they are called conviction integrity units, and they are housed within the prosecutor's office, and they are charged with preventing wrongful convictions and also looking into and addressing possible wrongful convictions in their particular jurisdiction. And there is, if you look at the data now, the NRE, there are some cases where the Innocence Project and other professional exonerators are actually collaborating with and working with the conviction integrity units. There's also been some skepticism about that because they're housed within the prosecutor's office. And so this seems like, there's an alliance, a loyalty there, but there are some of these conviction integrity units that are being very successful at this time. All right, so what about after innocence? What about after you've gone through all of this? You've been wrongfully convicted, you've been wrongfully incarcerated, and you finally get there. You finally win your freedom. So the data shows exonerees show a significant and diverse mosaic of psychological, emotional, financial, physical, and social consequences. It is devastating to be incarcerated and not be responsible for what it is you're in prison for. Now, it is traumatic no matter what to go through an incarcerative experience. But when you are in prison for what you did, you can adopt a redemptive narrative that says, you know what, I don't like this situation, I don't like this environment, I don't like where I'm at. I'm here because of choices that I made, and I can choose differently in the future, and I can avoid this circumstance. When you are wrongfully convicted, you have no such redemptive narrative to hang on to. You did not do what you are in prison for. There's profound loss. There are years that cannot be redeemed. Often loved ones pass away, spouses or significant others leave, children grow up without them. Often exonerees do not even get an apology. Research shows that the trauma that the wrongfully convicted endure very much mimics that they see in refugees and prisoners of war. They are not the same when they come out as they were when they went in. And often the family does not know how to respond to this. Everyone has waited for this miraculous day to occur, and then it's finally here. And the individuals, the exonerees coming out, are just not the same as they were when they went in. And there are all kinds of issues that they have to tackle now on the other side of their wrongful conviction. Here are some issues, right? There's often no advance warning of release. Okay, so that means immediately there is needs for food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and money. You get out with what was in your pocket at the time that you were incarcerated. If you're lucky, you may get some gate money of $25 or $50. Exonerees do not get the same support we offer to parolees and probationers. None. The minute you are deemed to be innocent and your conviction is vacated, the state is completely severed of all responsibility to you. So you are on your own. If you are on medication while incarcerated, that is not going to continue. Many exonerees need basics such as an ID or a social security card. They may need a driver's license. They may need to learn how to drive again. There are significant issues depending on how long they've been behind bars with advancements in technology and just feeling completely out of line with what is going on in the outside world. There are employment and housing issues because often the arrest still shows up. There's a woman named Anna Vasquez. She's part of the San Antonio Four. And if you Google her name in San Antonio Four, you'll pull up links to her documenting her story. She spent 16 years behind bars, wrongfully convicted, and it was 5 years after that before her record was cleared. So there is no magic button somewhere, something that someone automatically pulls and wipes your record out and gets the expungement for you. That is a process that is sometimes dropped and left, and people fight to have that expunged off their record. There are very clearly time gaps you have to explain. Their research shows there's a stigma that surrounds a wrongfully convicted, that people just don't really quite believe it. There are differences in technology. As I've said already, I am in contact with an exoneree who was in his 80s, and he was spent 35 years behind bars. And just looking at a cell phone and trying to figure out how to work a smartphone has been a significant challenge. Going into a McDonald's and trying to order from a kiosk, there are just all of these sorts of things that they're confronted with when they come out. And again, there are no resources and no support that is provided for them. There's profound loss. There's stigma from the general public. There's also stigma from the realization that people believed the exoneree was actually capable of doing the crimes. I can remember one gentleman talked about how he had been convicted of killing his parents. He went back to the small town and, so happy, so excited to be out and be free. And he was met with a lot of disbelief. People had been, had thought he was capable of doing that all those years. They ended up having to leave. They couldn't make the shift. And it was so horrible for him to consider that they really thought he was capable of that. Bottom line, they need significant help to rebuild their lives. Chances are you have seen a news story or read an article where someone who was wrongfully convicted was awarded, $500,000 or $1 million or some great amount. And those do hit the media, and they are in no way representative of the experience of most exonerees. There are no automatic compensation measures in place. The only thing an exoneration guarantees is release from prison. That is it. Okay, so the avenues to compensation are state statutes, federal civil suits, common law tort suits, and private bills. Currently, there are 35 states which have statutes that provide financial compensation for the wrongfully convicted, 15 states which do not have any on the books. Now, you must apply. You must apply. The average wait time for that is 3 years. In the meantime, you are on your own. If you are not lucky enough to have family around, if you're not lucky to have support, and depending on how long you've been in, some of that support, they may have passed away. They've disconnected from you. If you don't have that, you are literally on your own. And every state that has those statutes does it a little bit differently. For instance, in Florida, if you were ever convicted of a felony, if you have any felony history at all, you cannot apply for a wrongful conviction compensation. You are automatically disqualified from even applying. Some states will not allow a defendant to apply for a wrongful conviction if they pled guilty. It makes them ineligible. Some states have an amount per year, but it caps off. So for instance, Wisconsin has $5,000 per year, but it caps out at $25,000. There are several states like that, and still others do not give any financial compensation, but give free room and board and tuition at a community college or a state college. Now, that's a wonderful gesture. It's a small part, though, a very small part of what is actually needed. And for many exonerees coming out, that is not going to be something that is of use to them. Few states have provisions which allow for services and financial compensation. Each of these 4 options to exonerees present substantial obstacles which must be overcome with the exonerees to receive compensation. And despite the overwhelming empirical evidence for need of a substantial psychological and mental health support system underneath these exonerees, currently there are only 6 states which actually provide mental health services for them as a part of the compensation which is available, which again, you must apply for. And again, the average wait time is about 3 years. So the reality of this is that over half of all exonerees have not received any financial compensation whatsoever and those who have, the amounts fall far short of what is needed. I do a lot of talking about wrongful convictions. I teach a wrongful convictions class at the University of Louisville. I work the cases. One comment I hear a lot is, well, the system is just broken. It's a broken system. And that kind of makes me a little irritated, because it's, you know, this system is not this arbitrary out there thing that we can't impact and we can't influence. It is not about broken systems. It's about people. It's always about people, and it never stops being about people. It's about the people who create and perpetuate the broken systems. It's about the people those systems harm. It's about the people who are willing to work to both remedy and prevent those harms. It is always about people. So therefore, change is always possible. And that's where the hope is, that we have this ability now through the empirical study to really examine this issue and to take the common sense steps to prevent wrongful convictions, to remedy those. And for sure, we need some definite improvement in the way that we care for exonerees after innocence. I'm going to show you guys a video here. This is, I call this the human face of wrongful convictions. I told you at the beginning how much that has impacted me to work the cases, then study the data. This is from 2018. This was one of my cases. This particular individual that's about to come out, a free man, his name is Charles Jackson. He was convicted of murder and attempted murder in the state of Ohio, and he spent 26 years behind bars. I found the evidence that was able to prove him innocent. And the Innocence Project legal team, just a crazy, incredible group of people, won his freedom, won his exoneration. Now, when he was incarcerated, his girlfriend was pregnant with his daughter. So he had never been able to embrace his daughter as a free man. And what you're going to see in this video is a full-grown 26-year-old woman jump on her daddy with all of the energy she can possibly muster. And this huge celebration. Now, Charles Jackson had a lot of support, which is not necessarily the case with a lot of exonerees. So this was a beautiful thing to see. And also, during the time that he was incarcerated, his nephew in Florida found that he was dying of kidney failure and he needed a kidney transplant. Would you believe that Charles Jackson tested as a match? So no sooner did he get released from prison, it wasn't even a few weeks later that he ended up going to Florida and giving a kidney to his nephew and saving his nephew's life. But I want to have you guys watch this here and see the celebration as he gets free.
Or Virginia, I don't think the sound is working, but we can just watch.
That's his daughter.
Okay.
All right, that goes on for quite a while. But that was a just an absolutely memory-making day. It was right before Christmas too. It was not too long before Christmas. So when he walked out that evening, he walked out into downtown Cleveland, which was just lit up with Christmas decorations, and a wonderful thing. A very strong support system. Many of the Innocence Projects that are around the country, their exonerees will wrap themselves around the new exonerees coming out and provide them with support, having been in their shoes, and sort of mentor them and walk alongside them, which is a really wonderful thing. This person here, the blue sweatshirt, he is a former OIP exoneree as well, but you can see the jubilation here, and just a remarkable thing. And again, he was so fortunate to have such a great network of support for him. I've worked other cases where you watch someone come out and they have their attorney, they have the members of the team that have worked on their case, and there is no one else in sight for them. And so it is not only a tragedy when these things occur, but in my opinion, it is an additional tragedy that we do not support the exonerees coming. We get it as wrong as we can possibly get it. We take someone's freedom from them. We rip them out of their community, away from their family, and we don't manage to find a way to really support them in rebuilding their life. All right, let's see here. Stop sharing. If I can, I'm not sure. Let's see. Well, how about if I just do that? Does that work?
Yep, you perfect.
Great.
Perfect. That was great. And I am honestly a little bit blown away by some of those numbers. Like unbelievable that to see some of those numbers and percentages. You just got a great comment in the chat. It says, Virginia, your contribution to our criminal justice department and teaching these important courses and providing a rewarding internship for our students is invaluable. Thank you. I think that is from Kim Hendricks, I believe.
Oh,
and
thank
then
you, Kim.
there were just a couple questions earlier from Sarah Rudolph Pollard. And I think they were at the same, I was taking notes as she asked them. I think it was when you were talking about, and Sarah, feel free to chime in if I'm wrong, when you were talking about that first DNA exoneration, and sort of how that played out. One question was, why does it take so long to process so many of these things? And then the other one was she charged for any of this? I think the person who
let me this is Sarah. Because I just kind of half wrote stuff because I was trying to get it in. But yeah, my one question was why do these take so long? You were given the years, the amount of time that it takes from beginning to end. And then when you were talking about the age where, the children, and then when those that take guilty plea and all of that. And then I just said it stands to reason that the majority of wrongful convictions are, and I just said teenagers. And it just made me think of the Central Park 5.
Yes. Oh, yes. Very well known case.
Yeah.
Yes, for
And,
sure.
and the girl that made the false accusations, was she ever charged with anything?
So I'll address that one first. I do not believe so. And I'll tell you why. She actually, if I'm remembering the details of this correct, and it's been a while since I looked at the case, she actually came forward before the DNA testing to say she had falsified the report and she made it up, and she was not believed. So this sometimes happens. So there are times where someone comes forward and they recant, and the court or the judge looks at it and says, I don't know if you were lying then. I don't know if you're lying now. Everything stays the same. I'm not touching anything. So if I'm remembering this particular case correctly, she had actually come forward. It doesn't mean she shouldn't be charged, but I'm thinking through what I remember from the case is that there was nothing else on that. And there are issues sometimes too. This has actually just come up in one of my other cases where the statute of limitations on filing a false police report has expired. And it may be that was the case there. As for why these wrongful convictions take so long, oh my goodness, it's heartbreaking. First and foremost, our justice system is not set up to recognize that we make mistakes, which is ridiculous because the justice system is all made up of people and people make mistakes. So there are all these checks and balances along the way that are supposed to make sure that this does not happen. But as you saw, most cases actually have multiple reasons why a wrongful conviction happens. But post-conviction, the process is very, very slow. There's a research study out there that also looked at who is actually opposing the post-conviction reviews and who is holding things up and what is happening. And it's often there's police, there's prosecutors, there's judges who all at any stage can really mess with things and keep it. And there's also this sort of like passing a hot potato. Nobody wants to be the one to say, okay, that was a wrongful conviction. Okay, yes, this is a mistake. And the legal process we now have just takes a very, very long time. The appeals process takes a long time. The justice system is not set up to you know, it's ironic that the time limit to present new evidence is 1 to 3 years from the time of your conviction, right? And yet these situations can take decades to resolve themselves. There's so much that needs to change, and part of it is laws need to change, but also policies and procedures on how we handle things. We really do not have a system that is set up to address an error on the other side of a conviction.
Thank you for that, Virginia, and for Sarah for those questions. Those are all the questions we had, and we are at 8:02 right now. So I want to again thank you, Virginia. This was very informative and insightful. And I echo what Kim said. I think our students are super fortunate to have you when you're teaching classes. And we are fortunate to have you as a 3-time U of L alum. And I also want to thank our Criminal Justice Alumni Council, especially Dr. Keeling, for getting this event together. We definitely will have future criminal justice alumni events coming up. So everybody keep an eye out for those. We will also send the recording of this out within the next couple of days to everyone too. So it'll also go to those who weren't able to sign on but registered. We'll send it out to them as well. So thank you again, Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending too. I really appreciate the opportunity, and feel free to reach out to me through email if you have any other questions or further discussion on this.
Perfect. Thank you all. Hope you have a great night, and we will hopefully see everybody very soon.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.